Well, dear friends, it's great to be here, I must say, and to see you all. And today we're doing the first 3 chapters of the book of Exodus. So what I'd like to do is 4 things tonight. One is a general introduction again to the book of Exodus and how it fits in. The second thing I'd like to do is to look at chapter 1 of the book of Exodus because it sets the scene. Chapter 2 will be the early life of Moses, and that's part 3. And part 4 will be chapter 3, the call of Moses. So that's what I'd like to do tonight. So back to the general introduction. We call it the book of Exodus. That's how the Greeks called it. Exodus means the departure. But the Hebrews, the Jewish people, call it the book of names because the first words of that book says, these are the names. So it's the first word of the Hebrew Bible, book of Genesis. So it's called the book of names. Small point, but just to know. If you remember what the book of Genesis is all about, Genesis gives us the mythological account, the mythical account of how we got here, the birth of the universe. How did sin and chaos come into humanity? Chapters 1 to 11 of the book of Genesis. It then moves into the great legends of the Jewish people. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and their stories and all of that. A little bit like, for English people, King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. It's that sort of, it's very hard to get behind it to what actually took place. But they're the names, and they were real people, and there are legends attached to them. That's chapters 12 to 36 of the book of Genesis. And finally, there's a lovely little novella, a little story, a little book. This novella about Joseph. It hangs together beautifully. It's a lovely story. It's crafted well. And that is chapters 37 to 50. So that gets us really to where the Jewish people are in Egypt. At least a band of them. The Joseph tribe and the other tribes are there. So that's the first book of the Bible. The Jewish people are in Egypt. Now the next 4 books of the Pentateuch, which is Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, tell us about Moses. The second chapter tells about his birth, the second chapter of Exodus, and the last chapters of Deuteronomy tells us about his death. There's no other time in the history of the Old Testament where there are 4 whole books devoted to 1 or 2 generations of people. And the reason is because it's the most important time for the Jewish people. So we're really looking at the foundational moment of the Jewish faith here. We're not going to spend too much time asking historical questions. You can ask them if you like. Pitom and Ramesses, the store cities, did they really exist? Ramesses II, Yalbrunna, was he really the pharaoh under which the Jewish people escaped? What happened at the Red Sea, or the Sea of Reeds as it should be called? Did they really go through and as Cecil B. DeMille showed us, the whole, there was walls of water and they just went through the centre? What route did they travel? It says a lot of names and so on. And then if we leave that and go to the 10 Commandments, did Moses really ascend the mountain and receive 2 tablets of... So we won't go into the historical thing because, firstly, it's not the major reason why the Jewish people hold This is the story of their faith. The historical elements are just so hard to get back to, really, the details of it. Because this is the story which they kept telling and telling and telling. And the details changed as the circumstances of their life changed. So when they moved from living in tents to living in the settled land, things changed there. When they were then in exile, again, things changed there. And the retelling of the story, which of course is every Passover, was changed a little bit to suit how God acts for us now. But the basic story is real, is true. And the basic story is that a group of Jewish people had a redemptive experience after being slaves in Egypt. It was connected in some way with escaping, leaving, and water. And the Egyptians were defeated. And then for the second story, that's the Exodus part, then the second part is at Mount Sinai. The Jewish people did worship God there. They came to some sense of covenant. We keep the commandments, and God is always faithful to us because He's chosen us. So that's what happened in some way. The details we're not so sure about these days. 40 to 50 years ago, we would have spent a lot of time talking about Ramesses II. But now it's so hard to know if that really was the time. Maybe the emperor the pharaoh after him, and so on. So we can't get back, because what we have finally is around the year 500 BC, and it's just so hard to get back to the actual events of the time. But the key is how God acted, what God did, and what happened to these Jewish people. Our Bible study will have 5 weeks now. This is the first week, just finished, on the Exodus experience. And to close, you're going to have 3 weeks on the Sinai experience. And in between, you've got your travel music one, which is your, the wilderness experience. 1 lesson on that, 1 time on that. That's what you've got. So it's clear that the Exodus is the fundamental one. We say that Exodus 1 to 15 is at the heart of a Jewish person's faith. We say it's their foundation moment, the defining moment of their faith in what Yahweh is like. They come to know what God is truly like. They know that God has chosen them, and they know that God has acted powerfully on their behalf. And if we remember that every Passover, which is their greatest feast, they told the story again. Every Passover. And of course, when we started to explain Jesus, when Jesus came among us and died and rose again, we had to go back to the Passover experience to explain who Jesus really is, what His death and resurrection means for us. It too is a liberation. It too is a redemption. The same words that we used for the Jewish people's experience of the Exodus. If we really want to understand Easter, one of the primary sacraments of our church, I'm not going to go into why Sunday and Easter are sacraments, but they are sacraments of our church. If we really want to understand Easter, well, the most important reading we have